Don't start like that. Hey, y'all.
Well, I was gonna do the lip curl thing, but I had to get ready for it.
Hey, guys.
Oh, wait, I did it wrong. Wait, how did I do it before? How did I do it? I don't know how I did it.
Hello, individual.
Hello, individual.
Our one alone watcher.
I know.
Oh, it's Black Dialectic. What's going on?
What's going on?
Happy Pride. Ow. Hey, Jesus. You are on early.
Yup. You're going to have to listen to us ramble for me.
All good. No, we can bring them on. Oh. What up, what up, what up?
What's going on?
This is just the preamble. You can stay on and just kick it while we do our little
check-ins.
Yeah, our check-ins.
Or if you need time to do other stuff, you can also come right back.
Exactly.
Or I'll come right back.
Okay. All right.
Okay. What time should I hop back on?
4:20.
Okay.
Earth Day.
Yeah, 3:20 your time.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Spoiler alert, y'all. That's our interview guest. Jesus Gregorio Smith. We got the baby today, so right now I am appeasing her in the stroller.
And she's side-eyeing.
Yeah.
TF out of me right now.
But she's probably going to be on one. So.
She got mad at me earlier because I told her I'd take her man, and she really looked at me sideways.
Yeah, she ain't got no man, no.
Obviously not.
No.
But you see how she curled her lip just then when I said it again?
Look, hey, young fisticuffs.
She really is like, I don't like that comment.
Yeah.
It's good. I was really just singing the song. That's really all I was doing. Okay.
All right. So anyway, Sankara's here. She may make a cameo.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? And you also can hear her in the background.
Obviously.
Huh.
Hi, beautiful. You really like it when I say that. But when I say other stuff, you be looking at me sideways. All right.
I want my Kindle, Sankara. I feel like you were in on this ploy. Oh, you weren't? Oh, you weren't? Okay, my bad. I didn't mean to accuse you. Okay, it wasn't you. It was your daddy.
Okay, all right.
Anywho, what's going on, y'all? What's going on?
All right, y'all.
So
it's David,
not a bat. Still,
not a bot.
Oh, I was like, not a bat. Okay.
All right, y'all. What's up? Thanks so much for joining us today. We so I had a little health scare on Monday, which is why we were not able to do the show on Monday. It turns out, so it's funny because when we were like writing our show notes, I was like, oh, I think I might have a blood clot. I absolutely had a blood clot. So that was why we did not have the show on Monday, because I was in the ER. I had a blood clot in my leg. Thankfully, it was what do they call it? It was in a clot in a superficial vein. So they're not worried about it like moving into any organs or anything. What's up, mama? What's up, mama? Wake up, mama. But yeah, so I spent the day going between urgent care and ER. It kind of annoyed me because I complained about my foot last week, and I was having foot pain all week. And then 2 nights ago, I noticed that it was moving up my leg. And so I was up in the middle of the night having a full-blown panic attack because I was like, on WebMD, Mayo Clinic.
Pulmonary embolism.
Yes, that's exactly what I was like, I'm going to die. And so when I got up on Monday, I went to the urgent care. But the doctor tried to say, well, maybe because you hurt your foot, you were walking funny, and it was a muscle sprain. And even the paperwork that she gave me when I left was all about a muscle sprain. I was like, no, girl, it was absolutely a blood clot. And she gonna ask me, are you in the medical field? I was like, no, I'm not. I just read. And I can cross-reference symptoms. But when I actually did go to the ultrasound tech was like, oh, most people don't feel blood clots. Like, I'm really surprised that you could even feel it. And then I could tell her exactly where it started. She's like, you're right. It's exactly where you say it is. So I was like, yep, I know. So I'm just, I'm not icing it, but doing warm compresses and everything. So I'm good. But that is why we were not able to have the show on Monday, but we are back. And so hopefully we will keep it moving.
Yeah, I see you're not wearing your compression socks.
No, not today.
You need to be wearing them compression socks,
Because I
girl.
don't like shoes, and I just like to have my feet out. But that's a whole other thing.
And then what? Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah. So Father's Day is coming, and yes, and so it'll be our first Father's Day too.
Yeah.
My friend's baby is actually turning 1 this weekend too, and my nephew's birthday is this weekend, also June 16th, which I think is actually Father's Day. I have been talking with my younger brother about what to get my father for Father's Day, and my dad is so like not a gift oriented person whatsoever. So we've been thinking about what would be useful for somebody who is not a gift person but actually needs something, which is usually like tools or something related to his computer.
Didn't you give him an iPad that he doesn't use?
He loves the iPad.
Okay,
he loves
so
the iPad.
Okay,
because that's another place for him to read. Like that's his thing. So if anybody has like ideas about Father's Day gifts for people who are not gift oriented,
get him a Kindle. It'll change his life.
Yes,
a Kindle. He'll like the Kindle even better than the iPad. I promise.
Because the Kindle's easier on your eyes, right?
And it's smaller. Like it's just so easy to read. You could just be doing stuff and be reading the Kindle.
But see, Melcher, my dad don't need a tool set because my dad's a construction worker. The whole garage is a workspace, so he don't need no more tools.
The world is his toolbox.
Yes. But for other dads, like that would absolutely make sense. But my dad got everything because he's an electrician by trade. But yeah, so we're working on it. But yeah, so that's all I have in terms of check-ins.
So for me, I got a few interviews and panels this week. I was on the Revolutionary Black Network on Monday, I believe.
Is it Blackout or Black?
Revolutionary Blackout Network. Yeah. Sorry, guys. I was on there on Monday, so check it out, you guys, if you're interested in hearing me in another format for some reason. We talked a lot about Breonna Joy Gray being fired from the Hill. We talked about a lot about Palestine, so check that out. I got a few more things coming up this week, so less than last week, but a few more things. Let's see. Let me look at my schedule. Y'all know if it's not on the calendar, I ain't doing it. I saw Bad Boys Ride or Die yesterday.
So y'all did go see Bad Boys because I thought that's what you weren't going to go see.
Yeah, we saw it because we was running late, and it started a little bit later because we were going to see Furiosa. Also, because we're like, do we want to do a movie or dinner in a movie? Furiosa was almost 3 hours, but by the time we ended up seeing Bad Boys afterward, we had the biggest fucking pretzel in the world. They have this thing called like the Bavarian, whatever the fuck. I was like, why is this pretzel $16 but the pretzel bites are $8? Because that was the biggest pretzel in the world. So that we had that and popcorn and some red vines. Just a second on the red vines. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But I did see Bad Boys. No propaganda notwithstanding. It was not bad. Martin Lawrence looks very ill. Like he
claims he's not ill.
He looks very ill. His eye whites are not that white. And my partner was talking about like
swollen too.
Yeah, like his timing was a little bit off. But I saw the funniest thing. I think it was on Twitter. It's like, the jury's out. Chris Rock deserved the slap because Will Smith is back. Like nobody cares. Whatever. So it's worth seeing, whatever.
Well, that was why I had the best sous chef yesterday because I was babysitting while they had date night. But
yeah,
that's why I say I should have did dinner and a movie because then I would have had my poop longer.
Right? Yeah, but we were not hungry. But it's absolutely propaganda. So of course I'm ambivalent, but it was it's something to watch, and it was the action scenes were very interesting. Yeah,
because the last one was actually kind of terrible to me. The last Bad Boy with that final scene was ridiculous.
Yeah, and they replaced Martin Lawrence's wife because it's been the same wife in like all 3 movies, and now they have Tasha. What's her? They have some other like a more well-known actress. I forgot her name, but like
you talking about the one who plays Tasha in Power?
No, her name is not Tasha. I don't know. It's not the way. I don't know who she is. But if you saw her, you wouldn't know who she was. But they did replace the wife, which I thought was strange because why? Anyway, so
Davis over said I was a class clown in high school. Kids used to say, "Yo, Davis funnier than Martin."
Nobody said that. Or they were talking about Dave Chappelle. But so tomorrow I have an interview with Mark Lamont Hill, and then I'm going to be on the Deep Dive podcast. Saturday, Sankara has her 6-month wellness visit. Actually, on Thursday, she will be officially 6 months. It's her half birthday, so shout out to Sankara. Woo woo! Happy half birthday, boo. And yeah, so that's my week. Oh, on Saturday I have a panel for Schaefer, which is like an international or foreign relations. It's like something foreign relations conference. I'll be on the panel. I'll be virtual because it's in Toronto and my passport has expired. I have not gotten it renewed. So I'll be doing it virtually, but yes. So anyway, that's one update. Sankara turning 6 months. And then I'm also looking for an apartment, y'all, which is super trash. We're moving back to Detroit because I work at Wayne State, in case anybody forgot. So if you are in the Detroit area and you got any leads, we thought about a house, like either moving into or buying a house, but we don't want to shovel snow. It really came down to that. So we want to live somewhere where they'll shovel and ice and do all that work. So yeah, apartments or condos, if you have any leads, let us know.
That is real.
Yeah, so those are our updates. So now on to y'all's comments.
He said a doorknob is funnier than Martin. Well, we talked about this because I wasn't a Martin fan growing up, but you watched the show.
So there's the show Martin and then there's Martin Lawrence. Yeah. So like the show Martin it's a very particular type of humor.
It is.
Okay. So what up, Rouse Pasta Sauce? What up? Shout out Ricky Ryan. Got Sankara a couple outfits from when she's a little bit older. Very cute, very cute.
She was in some very cute pink overalls earlier today, but apparently
they gave her the worst fit in the world, so we took them off. But they're Carhartt pink overalls, y'all. They're hella cute. Hella cute.
Okay,
anywho, onto your
comments. Let's go to the comments. All right, so I'll start with the first one. John Blaze 42 said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension; it's the presence of justice," which is a quote from King.
Yeah, so that was I guess he was starting from the beginning because that was on the episode 1.1, our very first episode. Okay. So Michael T had a whole bunch of comments, so I'll just start with the first one. Michael T said, "I respect your view on bell hooks. Nevertheless, her theoretical frame working of the primary social forces we're up against, especially in the U.S., i.e. white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, is irrefutable. I don't think anything is irrefutable. And also, just to have the phraseology is one thing, but to actually work out what's the primary contradiction at a given moment and how those actually articulate is quite another thing. I'm not saying she does or doesn't do it. All I'm saying is that nothing is irrefutable."
The next one says that while organization is absolutely necessary in any movement, camaraderie, affiliations, and solidarities often change, which is true. But I actually do think so. To me, solidarities are political. So solidarities should change based on what's happening. But if you don't have a commitment to a particular thing, but camaraderie and affiliations, I think, are different than solidarities. But I do think a level of camaraderie is necessary to be able to work together.
So shout out to Melcher.
Yes.
Melcher said, "Haha, guys, I couldn't make it, but I'm glad you unblocked me. Much love. My apologies again. Glad you're unblocked too, Melcher. Hopefully you can you're here live or you can circle back when you're able to catch the show."
No, Melcher's here because they
what up, Melchi?
Earlier. I can't remember, but they did comment.
Okay. Yeah, welcome back again. My bad.
Okay, Michael T also says, "Yes, CBS, when we critique others objectively as possible, we contribute to the dialogue." I think that's from last episode when we were talking about criticism and self-criticism. So
yeah, and I think from when we were reading John
on organizing, yeah.
So he also said, "Writing down your thoughts, Layla, helps tremendously to clarify them."
Yeah. Wait, where is that?
The one above, yeah.
Oh, I skipped it, my bad, yeah. Okay, so this one's directed towards me. So this is from Muhammad, which is from the 1919 mag, which I believe they dropped the second, I don't know if it's the first part or the second part of the interview today, but on Pan-Africanism, but he says, "Hey y'all, Layla, I watch these streams, so I'm going to be airing you on here until you get back to my emails." Y'all, I'm terrible emails. I even tell my students, like, don't email me. Just what's wrong, poo-poo? Just set up an appointment with me and I will meet with you. A question I had for you on the next stream was a follow-up about your work in Venezuela. You touched on in the interview. What is it like there now? Would you recommend visiting? And what do people need to know if we're interested in visiting now, particularly from the US/Canada/the West? 1919 is currently planning a solidarity delegation to a Latin American country in 2025, and we thought Venezuela would be tough, but I would love to go and see what's going on there now. So I will say that, let's see, when was the last time I was in Venezuela?
Like 2019 or 2018?
I feel like that wasn't the last.
Or 2021 for the Cumbe.
That was in 2019, but I feel like I've been there since.
Oh yeah, like was it like
Like 2 years
It was like
ago or
you and your
something.
that was Cuba.
No, you're talking about Colombia. We went to
Oh,
Colombia. We went to Colombia
yeah,
for
yeah,
the
yeah. And you went to Cuba, didn't you?
yes, and I
Yeah.
went to Cuba. So one, I would always recommend going to Venezuela. Particularly, I mean, right now Maduro's still in power. And they do have, like Cuba, they have a lot of like solidarity delegations. They are very open to having groups of people come to see. In fact, they were looking for election observers for this year. So Mohammed, that might be something y'all can look into in terms of election observations. Like I said, I haven't been in like the last 2 years, so I can't tell you exactly what things are like in terms of things being on the ground. But I will say that for me, of my travels in Latin America, Cuba is like the place where I've always felt the safest. It's easy to move around. And I would say Venezuela for me is a second in that regard. Caracas is an interesting place because at different points in times, there's been like histories and issues with violence in the city. I will say that I do know people who have been a victim of violence in Caracas, but I personally never have been. I think that has to do with a lot of different things. Like I typically tend to follow people's instructions about how to coexist with people. So I tend to not wear like expensive looking things. I tend to like not flash things. I try to blend in so that, I typically don't have problems when I travel, but I would definitely look into anything related to like election observation, things like that. But I definitely think it's worth going.
By the way, it's very crazy that the U.S. doesn't have election observers, as in this raggedy ass bastard democracy, as Hubert Harrison calls it, definitely needs some election observers because they got, them fucking white right-wing nationalists intimidating people in lines wrapped around the block. They got pollsters working, like undermining the election, and it's only going to get worse. So it's like, for all these global South countries that require election observers, they need some in this raggedy motherfucker. How about that?
Erica said that Cuba and Nicaragua. So I've never been to Nicaragua, so I can't speak to it. But everybody that I know who's gone has also had really good experiences in Nicaragua
too. Dr. CBS not biding her time or playing the Trump card.
Biding her time.
Rim shot. Okay, so Norma Dean Murphy said, good show this week. The do's and don'ts of organizing was on point.
Thank you, Kylie.
Shout out to Ajamu Umi.
And then the last one is from Michael Anderson. The quality of content on this podcast is sincerely overwhelming in the best way. I'm still processing the conversation with Musa. Thank you for the study format and reading out loud with us. Love Ajamu's point about joining an organization if we believe the actual words we say. That hit home for me as I'm still struggling to find peace within myself to locate and dedicate myself to a political home. The piece on the role of student organizing and students as a class named some contradictions that I've been trying to work through with the history and limitations of the Black Studies movement. Mark Lamont Hill and Josh Myers on the office hours, late night, whatever the thing is called, about why Black Studies chose colleges as a site to do their work. Wondering what you both have to say about this as well. Thank you for the labor and the education. You want to speak to that?
Well, Black Studies has been happening, of course, prior to the formal institutionalization of Black Studies. It's been happening everywhere Black people are who are interested in creating a counterpublic, for example, or raising the consciousness of Black people. But higher education became a site of struggle in the 1920s and 1930s. So one of the few good things that Ibram Kendi has done when he was Ibram Rogers was the book, The Black Campus Movement. He has a chapter on what he calls a long Black student movement. He has a chapter on like the early struggles at HBCUs in the 1920s and 1930s. But in terms of the 60s and 70s moment, higher education became a battleground because, number one, was the 1965 Higher Education Act, which sort of democratized education, allowed for more working class folks who have been involved in the civil rights movement and other organizing off campus came on campus, which then also made colleges and universities a battleground. Once more and more racialized people and poor people got onto these campuses, they saw that it was no panacea, that even if there were more racialized people, their students, there tend to be not that many faculty, and the curriculum was Eurocentric, even at historically Black colleges and universities, especially in the 1960s and 70s. So it became a battleground because it was an attempt to democratize knowledge, power, and access, and to redistribute all those types of resources as well. It was a baked-in contradiction, because once things became formally institutionalized and recognized by the sort of powers that be, then the more activist and community-oriented aspects of it became disciplined out. And so it's something that's ongoing. That's why every 3 to 5 years, there's some type of struggle around Black studies that's demanding more Black faculty, Black studies being departmentalized, et cetera, because it always was, it is the only discipline that came into higher education through struggle, right? And then by extension, ethnic studies and women's and gender studies. And so everything is up for grabs in this society, including college and university campuses, especially as we're seeing with the encampment. So I don't think it was a mistake per se, but I don't know how seriously the contradictions of embedding Black studies in the U.S. colleges and universities, which are the intellectual arm of the state, I don't know how seriously that was taken, which is why we continue to contend with it.
Let's see. Kenyatta said, most interested in the Bluefields and the Garifuna areas, especially since I have relatives there. I was just looking for their name. Paul Joseph Lopez Oro. He does work. I believe he is Garifuna himself. I think that he's going to be at Bryn Mawr, but he does interesting work on Garifuna populations also in queer studies. And so, speaking of which, it's June, it's Pride Month. So we wanted to have conversation about queer politics. And, for us over here, it's always about left politics for Black folks and queer folks. And so we wanted to have this conversation today. So we have brought on a brilliant colleague, Jesus Gregorio Smith. I'm going to read out your bio. If you don't like to listen to your bio being read, just cover your face for a minute. Jesus Gregorio Smith is an associate professor and chair of the Ethnic Studies program, as well as an Associated Colleges of the Midwest Andrew Mellon Fellow. He received his PhD in sociology in 2017 from Texas A&M, where he studied the intersections of systemic racism, masculinity, and sexuality, and how they influence mental and sexual health. He's published various research pieces, including peer-reviewed articles and chapters in avenues such as Archives of Sexual Behavior, AIDS and Behavior, and Issues in Race and Society. Jesus also co-edited a collection of essays through Lexington Books entitled Home and Community for Queer Men of Color, the Intersection of Race and Sexuality. Currently, he has a book contract with NYU Press for his first sole-authored manuscript. Alongside his academic work, he's also published op-ed pieces in public sociological essays in Racism Review, Black Perspectives, and Latinx Talk. His research has been featured and his expertise sought after in popular media presses such as Vice, The Washington Post, and Rolling Stone. Similarly, he has given invited talks, seminars, presentations, and has won a National Research Fellowship, the Woodrow Wilson National Foundation Career Enhancement Fellowship for junior faculty. So we welcome Musa. I saw Musa in this. That's why I said Musa. We welcome. This is like trying to read too many things at once, but we really appreciate you being here today.
I'm so honored and so thankful to be invited to be a part of this for June, for Pride Month, for Blackness, for all the good things.
Yes, Jesus is my pride and joy.
Yeah, look at that. Look at that baby. Your baby's so cute. Look at
Sorry, she has perpetual incredulity and mean mugs, but she's very happy to see you. We have so much ground to cover, so let me just go ahead with the first question. Yes. So to start, how does queer liberation differ from LGBTQ plus rights in terms of organizing and struggle, especially in terms of what is to be done? And how does this specifically apply to Black folks?
Yeah, I think, this is a really great question to start this whole conversation with, because it just really touches on how much I think historically you see kind of the struggle over these different battle lines that are drawn, whether it's queer liberation, whether it's LGBT rights. And so oftentimes when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking broadly how, especially how it's read in the US and I'm sure in other locations, LGBT rights tend to sound very much or be focused much more in line with legal rights, and disagree with me if you will, or feel free to add to this. But I often think about, okay, when the push was for marriage equality in the United States, despite the fact that so many queer folks, especially queer folks of color, especially Black queer folks, were struggling with job opportunities, employment, their material reality was really harmed by a lot of structural forces. So it seemed, this split and almost this whitewashing very much of the movement. So it's all about, how can we get married? How can we get these rights? It's less about labor laws. It's less about how we are protecting our trans brothers and sisters, things like that. So perhaps queer liberation is much more about, the structural resistance and this solidarity amongst groups that kind of resist structures of violence, where LGBT rights feels so much more in line with uh, assimilation. And perhaps it's like a very simplistic way of that I'm seeing it, and I welcome y'all's thoughts. But that's kind of how I saw it. What do you all think?
No, I mean, I think that's typically the distinction, even in the frames. I think even for Malcolm, when we was talking about human rights as opposed to civil rights, right? Being able to have a broader stage, which is in terms of what we understand. Ricky Ryan just commented in the chat, individual rights versus people-centered human rights, obviously. So yeah, I'm thinking on the same page.
But also even beyond a rights framework, right? Liberation is about like what is the type of world, society, social relations that we envision beyond rights and recognition, which can only be codified through like a liberal, often capitalist framework, right? And so Jasbir Puar talks about like homo nationalism, right? So oftentimes LGBTQ rights reproduces like a homo nationalism that really, it replaces the normative citizen with queer folks, right? Often white male queer folks. So yes, I think on much of what you're saying. Yeah.
So I'm gonna. Oh no, go ahead.
Oh yeah. Because that was just thing. I love that you mentioned Puar's work, especially on homo nationalism, and just all of these things kind of like mesh in different ways. Because I'm also thinking of Homonormativity by Lisa Dugard, and how these are all about these kind of whitewashing and this assimilationist frameworks. How we don't need to be at the side. We are not these radicalized folks, despite this history, right? Like we know the history for queer folks in the United States, especially Black and Latinx queer folks, have been marginalized by police brutality, right? Thinking of Stonewall in essence as this resistance to police brutality, and how much that's been stripped from these conversations, and how much capitalism and the gay capitalists have been tied together as the real version and the real image of queerness and gayness in the United States. That's kind of been pushed, and globally is kind of this image of queerness versus the radical roots that I think are there. So absolutely, I think you're speaking largely to what I think it has been lost, which is a lot of as deeply marginalized, deeply oppressed folks. What does it mean to work across different groups to resist these structures of oppression that are harmful, that are bringing on large amount of death to trans folks, to Black folks, in so many different ways, especially because we are not assimilating to, or not even capable, nor do we want to assimilate to a white queer standard, which is very much just that heteronormative standard.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, I want to kind of take us back to some of the work that you've done. So you wrote a piece a few years back, I think it was like 2019, for Black Perspectives, where you explored talking about gender oppression and Blackness in your classroom. In that piece, you said you learned to move beyond a solely sort of U.S. based feminist concept to teach your students about the complexities of gender, and that feminist theorists who expand the sort of geographical boundaries of our inquiries could help challenge narrow notions of gender hierarchies that lead to these often unuseful or unhelpful debates about oppression Olympics, right? So could you talk about what informed this lesson and how you've utilized what you learned from that sense?
Oh yeah, I really appreciate that question because, I think I had gotten my PhD from Texas A&M, which is a very, very white, very, very conservative, and very, very wealthy school. That And so even some of my understanding or how I was trained in particular ways and what I was learning was going to be very much limited in some ways. I wasn't in bigger spaces where you're getting a variety of different engagements necessarily. And sociology, for folks who don't know, is also historically, despite having these radical Black roots with the voice and so forth, um, is overwhelmingly run by white folks, white males in particular. So I felt like a lot of what I was understanding and being trained in early on, and perhaps this is just a flaw of the limits of my humanity too, is it seemed like what was articulated to me was, there's hierarchies to our oppressions, and very much, in this society, you have very much racial oppression with Black people at the bottom of that hierarchy and whites at the top. You also have gender oppression, which oftentimes is men at the top and women at the bottom, and you don't see the complexities of that necessarily. So some of what I was learning and being told, in essence, and I think perhaps you all can speak to this too, sometimes you even hear it on the ground when you're out doing activism work, is people kind of articulating that same sort of language around, men uniformly are privileged by being men versus, women, and so forth and so on. And I think that sort of logic that I had was so limited and incorrect. I'm going to be quite frank. Like, it wasn't capturing the variety when it came to gender. It wasn't capturing all this sort of work that's been done, especially in Black studies, around the complexities of gender. So when I was able to attend kind of a workshop on this, especially for Black studies, I think, Sharice, you put that together, actually.
Yeah,
uh,
Carl, and you have a diaspora one.
Yeah. I was able to kiki with folks and learn and rethink about gender in ways that I thought were far more productive. And it was stepping outside of the US box around this and understanding how different societies or different groups can comprehend gender, right? Or how complex it can be. So, Wumi's work, I think, was really that point for me. It was like, oh no, in some societies, maybe age is the big thing, and not necessarily gender. But also just, working, exploring, gender in the US, it's also realizing, wait a minute, um, being a Black man does not privilege you necessarily as a man because you're Black. Precisely being Black could make you a huge target, in fact. And to be quite frank, some of us might argue that Black women and Black men switching places does not present a better situation at all. Whereas some might say that's the case for white women and white men. I think Black women and Black men oftentimes, if we were to reverse roles, would be in horrible positions either way. And so I think this was speaking to something that I wasn't necessarily being taught, or perhaps, again, just being young, I wasn't necessarily understanding or listening to. Even the popular narratives around that. I followed some popular bloggers at the time who would still articulate, huge followings, and still kind of articulate these things that, well, Black men are still privileged because they're men, regardless. And that's not to say we don't have huge issues around gender, of course. But I think that what oftentimes gets communicated, especially as we're organizing on the ground, sometimes can be very simplistic and can remove so much nuance and so much understanding that we have to have around these issues. And honestly, can sometimes just be distracting. And so when I started to, really grapple with that, it really, really helped me think, okay, this is the way we need to think about this. Let's step outside the US box when we're thinking about this. How do other countries see these issues, or how do they conceptualize gender? Why is this important? Why, when we look at our societies, how in fact does gender for men operate, for Black men specifically operate, or for trans men operate? How's that happening versus others? So that became super helpful. I will say it was interesting. It was an interesting phenomenon, and I'm so curious to hear how others respond to this. But in my classroom, which was vastly, Black folks here at Lawrence, Black students, it was so great. But there was so much debate around this issue. It was almost like the students did not want, like, where I was trying to be like, hey, we need to move in this direction. Because look who's winning when we're bickering with each other. It was like, no, man, they wanted to have it out. Black men are privileged this way. Black women are privileged this way.
Nobody wants to contend with like anti-Black misandry. It's like, Twitter is the space for that, but then it's also in the classrooms. They're like, Black, like absolutely fucking not.
Yeah, I was really interested in terms of how your students received it. So
yeah, no, I will say, and this is really fascinating, but most of the time when I do have these discussions, it seems like a lot of, this is all anecdotal, of course, but a lot of my career students have the biggest struggle with it. And I think that could be for a variety of reasons. One, being a queer man myself, sometimes I wonder if, if you're looking kind of for protection in your Black community, and you might feel like, oh, this homophobia I'm experiencing, or these sorts of things I'm experiencing. I wonder if oftentimes that is why queer folks in general feel like a rejection where they thought they would have protection in Black spaces. And again, this is anecdotal. It's not around, it's not largely the story, but I wondered if that played a role in why my queer students, my Black queer students in particular, had a really big issue with nuancing these discussions, or some might, one student in particular said straight up that the homophobia he was experiencing was, because of his Black father, and so, if that kind of turns into something more personalized, if that was kind of contributing to some of the discussion, some Black folks would say, they have easier times being around Black women or Black femme identified folks than cis hetero men, for instance. And so that, I think there's all sorts of issues that we can grapple with, but it still was odd to me, the almost latent rejection of any discussion around nuancing or understanding how those who are perceived as male Black men are incredibly vulnerable in so many different ways, whether it be sexually, whether it be death by police, in tremendous ways. And so being gendered in particular is so important. So I just think, and I do want to say clearly too, I do believe there's been literature on this. It's just sometimes I think when the popular culture takes on these things or takes on these theoretical frameworks, it gets simplified in such a way that you miss the nuances that are incredibly important to our discussions.
Just as a quick follow-up, you mentioned Oyewumi's work. Are there other places, other specific works outside of the U.S. that you found useful in this conversation, in like bringing this into the classroom? Or other
Not
places?
right off the... Okay. Yeah, I can't think right off the top of my head. I just remember that as being so monumental to how I understood Blackness outside of the U.S. context, and thinking about different Indigenous groups and how they're making sense of gender, that was really challenging to a main framework or a U.S.-centered framework.
And just, I mean, I think we might have mentioned this on the show before, but I don't know. I know she has a number of different works, but I know The Invention of Women was actually really important for me in understanding that there are other ways of creating hierarchies in societies that don't necessarily always privilege gender as one of those things. And one of the points she makes in that text is that in Yoruba society, it is age as opposed to gender that creates that bigger hierarchy, and that is more important, that there are more terms in the linguistic terms for age distinctions as opposed to gender distinctions, just for the audience.
So somebody just asked, before I get to my question, does the concept of intersectionality help when you're doing the kind of this kind of cultural movement work?
This is going to be very, very interesting. So I think that, I think for sure there can be ways that it can be very useful. I'm so curious of what you two think about this. I've seen, and one thing I will say is I don't I don't know if there's any one theory that's the Bible. And so I think everything needs to be up for critique and everything should be. And so even intersectionality has its limits. I've read some really great Marxist critiques of intersectionality that I think are important, especially as it talks about where the roots of oppression take place versus where intersectionality arguably can obscure those roots and tying it to a capitalist system or hyper exploitation. So I think there's ways that perhaps for sure it could be useful, but I also think there's ways that we need to be critical of it. So maybe in a specific way, if we're looking at a very specific context, a location, and so forth in specific forms of oppression, that can be very helpful in the ways that we articulate and understand things. But I also wonder sometimes if it can also contribute to why we might misunderstand things. Because I will say a lot of the folks who were talking about intersectionality early on were saying precisely that, right? Saying, I mean, there's some scholars who have written on this and said, it is men who are privileged in regardless of race, right? That men have these privileges by virtue of being men, and it was missing so much complexity to that, or misunderstanding the genre of Blackness and how it gets shifted through gender lenses. So I don't know if that answers it. What do you two think?
You know,
I would comes up a lot. So.
Yeah, intersectionality is not my framework, but
it's not really mine either.
Yeah, I would recommend Jennifer Nash's book. What is it called? Beyond
Intersectionality.
No, it's After Intersectionality, or it's Beyond Black Feminism After Intersectionality, or something like that. It's the subtitle is After Intersectionality. It's Black Feminism Reimagined.
Oh yeah,
Beyond Intersectionality. I read a couple weeks ago. It's actually quite good. People know where I stand on this. So I'm triple oppression is my thing. Yes. What I'm trying to bring back. So yeah. Okay, so the next question, sort of shifting gears a little bit. Over the past decade or so, there's been an increased rejection of pigs and corporations at Pride, like Pride parades, and even just their sort of overdetermination of Pride in general, Pride Month. How has the erasure of the radical roots of queer liberation emanating from Stonewall, for example, allowed for liberalism and capitalism to overtake not only Pride, but also the way that queer folks understand their struggle?
Yeah, no, this was a really, really great question. And it made me think again, kind of the historical roots of that radicalism, right? And so again, this is what drives me nuts, y'all, whenever I see folks or prides embracing police, which happens often. And one, it just seems so disconnected from the reality that a lot of young Black folks experience, especially young Black queer folks. There's work out there that talks about, for instance, the abuses police enact on Black queer bodies. And so the whole idea of having police be a part of, some parades even have police marching in them with the rainbow cars and all this stuff. It's wild, right? The disconnect from the realities and the roots of that radical rebellion that queer folks had against policing and against the policing of their bodies and all of that. So, the Stonewall riots, again, of course, with queer folks, especially Black and Latinx trans women who were fighting against, physically fighting against police brutality. That's the roots of this. And so the erasure of that, again, kind of speaks to this homo normativity, this homo nationalism, this whole idea, this pinkwashing idea, right? Of how we can become mainstream, how we can be assimilated into the dominant culture. This goes back to making marriage the big framework. What's even complicated about all of this too is with that erasure of trans folks, you then have folks who are basically with the erasure of trans folks, you'll have queer folks kind of reinforcing heteronormative visions of what relationships should look like. So then you'll have the Black queer femme who has his masculine partner, and they're both men, right? There's no transness to their identities at all, or non-binariness to their identities. And then it just reinforces this hetero lens and becomes palpable, for the dominant white queers to ingest. And it becomes very much, politically important for folks, so that some folks can become a part of the mainstream and not have to worry in other contexts. So, I think those early riots against police and resistance against pigs, it has been erased a lot from these conversations, but they're slowly coming back too. Like thinking of Boston, right? And thinking about as people were arguing about these pride parades, also attaching themselves to organizations that send money to Israel and wanting to shut those down, ending up policed again, and all the shame of that. I think you're starting to see a rise again of the radical roots and in the celebration of those radical roots and a return to that, so that the erasure that took place before is being resisted in a lot of different ways.
And I think that's really important. I think we see a lot of people trying to remind us that as much as pride, even like things like carnival, as much as they try to get co-opted by these sort of capitalist like money making ventures, that they do have very particular roots and origins, and that if we want to continue to do that type of work, like we need to be true to what those origins were. And they were struggles for liberation. They were struggles for being treated as like full human beings, right? And so it is our responsibility to make sure that those histories remain present and that we don't let the capitalist state take over these narratives and dominate how we understand what these instances are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The rainbow flag is still a pig.
A bomb with a rainbow on it is still a bomb. Yeah, like it's wild. The embrace. So I think a lot too about the Democratic Party as a whole and how they're utilizing these identities as a way to, again, pinkwash themselves to make them seem more progressive. So yeah, we have Black people in our party, and we have rainbows on our bombs, and so it makes things better. It's not as destructive, and so you kind of see that play out. And I think it also speaks to the way that perhaps there's an intentionality behind this, but that you can fragment groups. And so by displacing the radicalists and suggesting that they're radical and that they're not a part of this, but that there's a mainstream movement that should have acceptance, it seems like the point is to keep us from unifying and from working together.
Speaking of pinkwashing and Israel, right? So one of the books that I read recently, The Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts, which is by a woman, Nada Aliyah, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but she's also a member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective. There's a chapter that she has like against the pink wall or something in Israel. And one of the stories that she tells is that Israel likes to tout itself as being this like gay friendly place. And for one, Israel is not a gay friendly place. But even for Israeli queer folks, Jerusalem perhaps offers some protections, but the state of Israel does not, right? But they try to put themselves up against Palestine as this place because it's Arabic, because it's Muslim. It's a place where queerness is less accepted than Israel. And one of the stories that she tells is that one of the ways that the IOF, the Israeli occupation forces, basically gets people to turn is by targeting queer Palestinians, by following them online and getting evidence of whatever kind of, talk that they've had going on with other queer folks, and they threaten to out them to their families.
Yes.
Right? And they threaten to out them, and that this becomes a way that they get turned into informants for the Israeli state, right? And she talks about this phenomenon of pinkwashing. She says pinkwashing is a 21st century manifestation of the imperial European narrative of bringing civilization to countries colonized by Europe. As evidence of this, she talks about the insidious ways that Israel promotes itself as an oasis of gay freedom in an otherwise backwards region. which I've already mentioned, where they use the Israeli occupation forces to spy on queer folks in Palestine. Could you talk through your understanding of what pinkwashing is as a broader phenomenon, and then talk a little bit more about the dangers of pinkwashing in the case of Israel and or for oppressed peoples more broadly?
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. So I'm thinking of Syed Akshan's work, Queer Palestine and the Empire of Critique. And it's really good because it also taps into that definition of pink washing as well, and pink watching too. Pink watching is a sense of um, highlighting um, uh, behaviors that oh gosh, what I'm trying to say, that basically suggest or that are basically deceptive, right? So Israel gets to paint itself as, and I've seen so many arguments around this. People will say, in particular, will say, well, if you were queer, you'd go to the Middle East and you'd be killed, or the Arabs would have you killed. It's just another form of anti-Arab racism and anti-Palestinian racism that they utilize to say, here are these backwards people, and here is Israel that's much more progressive. And then you'll see soldiers, queer soldiers or gay soldiers, who are holding up the rainbow flag and kind of a virtue signaling to the rest of the world. You know, this is the progress. And so it's so interesting to use this, how empires utilize this kind of tactic to suggest that they are the beacons of human rights, and that these other groups, these racialized groups, especially dark and racialized groups, are backwards, and that they are untrustworthy. They don't deserve to live. In essence, like you don't be defending their lives. These queer people would be dead over there anyway. On the ground, we know people reporting and doing work on the ground, actual Palestinian folks who are queer, are talking about their lives and have been saying this, and have been saying, just like you mentioned, how, oh yeah, they'll take the stories of Israeli police letting in Palestinians so they can go celebrate at a gay bar or something like that. But what they don't say, and what people on the ground are revealing, is exactly what you said: how they get blackmailed, how they get put in very dangerous situations, that the police put them in those situations by asking them in front of family members whether or not they're gay or queer. All these sorts of things that are really destructive. Also, let's not forget, or that are intended to be harmful, manipulative. Let's not forget that, you know, you can't get married in Israel. There's so many things that are not pointed out about the abuses that take place, which seems to be the point. The point is, well, let's talk about some of these progressive moves that we have in comparison to the other, constructing the other in this essence, especially the Muslim or other, again, kind of tapping into Said's Orientalism and so forth. And then distancing that from progress of the liberal Israel while denying all the atrocities that are taking place. What does it matter to use that sort of language about the progress of Israel if you're killing off all the queer Palestinians? What does it matter? Queer Palestinians want to live. And so whatever game they're playing, and obviously it's intended to be to obstruct and to make sure that people don't see, to pinkwash, or people don't pay attention to the crimes that Israel is committing. That is the point in that scenario. And so, yeah, what does it matter if we can't live? If Palestinian people can't live, what does that matter? I also think this speaks to the way the U.S. and other Western empires, in essence, try to always do this. They always construct Palestinian and Arab folks as backwards, and African folks as backwards, right? And as savage. Here's that same kind of work that these empires have constantly done throughout history, just happening again in a very unique kind of way in the circumstance. And so the US gets to paint itself in that same sort of way, because it's like, oh, okay, we have all this progress for queer folks. But again, what does it matter if Black queer people are like Black trans women are dying at incredibly high rates in proportion to the population, right? And if these police states don't care to actually investigate those things, obviously we know police, we have so much empirical evidence of how unhelpful they are, then what does it matter? It seems to be missing the larger point about how dangerous a lot of this is, and the kind of crimes that take place in the United States against queer folks all the time. So the lack of caring about queer people, homelessness is extremely high. Other issues of poverty that result in other things that are happening in queer lives that are deeply affect their lives. It's like, oh, okay, you can get married. Okay, we'll take care of everything else. So even the US, all these other countries, they get to do this thing where they pretend like they are the most progressive, and that they should be trusted with the human rights expertise while they commit atrocities at the same time.
And and I think that if there, but so on the flip side of this, right, if there's anything that proves that all oppression is connected, right, the notion that people are so afraid of being outed to any community, and I'm not going to limit it to the Arab or Palestinian community, the notion that people are afraid of being outed to their community, and that is what then turns them can then turn them into enemies of their own people. To me, I think it speaks to something that we have to respond to, right, and that is that we have to reject these ways of being that even allow outing a person to be something worthy of hiding so that people can be turned into informants, right? And so that's, for me, that's not necessarily even a condemnation of any particular people, but I do think that it is important for us to recognize that what our enemies do is take advantage of the places where we are weak. And if we don't have good policy, number of these things, then that is what allows people who would otherwise not actually be our enemies to be turned into our enemies because of the types of internal community biases that we hold, that we may or may not hold, that then allows us to be turned against one another. And I think that that's the important takeaway for us, because I think on the one hand, like, it's easy to identify Israel as an enemy, right, in this, and they're utilizing these already sort of existing problematic relations that we have, but that's something that we also have to work to undo in our own community. So these are not things that can be used against us.
I mean,
absolutely.
Likewise, like, oftentimes these issues of marginality or being marginalized or subjected are used. Sorry, I'm trying to feed this baby and talk at the same time. But they're used to sort of obfuscate the primary contradiction, right? It is not that they don't matter, but they're used as a trump card. Like, yes, we're settlers. Yes, we're genociding a people since the 1940s. Yes, we have an apartheid state. Yes, we're engaging in ethnic cleansing, but they're homophobic. So it's okay, right? And so it's meant to obfuscate all of that in order to rationalize or legitimate. Just like, this whole discourse about like African Americans being like uniquely homophobic. When it's shown that African Americans are no more homophobic empirically than any other group. And this is not to say we don't have work to do in our community, as Layla just eloquently pointed out, but it's meant to, in this context, to obfuscate the primary contradiction of that we are an internally colonized, dispossessed, racially subjected people, right? So in that way, and we often fall for it because the identity reductionist argument is often easier. It's easier to have like a gotcha moment. Like, it's easier to point that out. It's easier to contend with than, oh shit, the corporations are making are reducing us to brutal half-lives, as George Jackson put
it. No, this is great. And I love what you were saying, Leila, especially about the exploitation of our vulnerabilities, right? So we can exploit the vulnerabilities of certain groups. It actually worsens their situations, and it operates to reinforce stereotypes about queer folks and about these different groups, and about Black folks as being more homophobic, all these things. So it seems that the pinkwashing operates to do several different things, including exploiting vulnerability, including reinforcing stereotypes, including distracting from the contradictions.
Right. And it's also like, so thinking alongside something that was just said in the chat, right? It's used as a technology of cultural imperialism, right? Because these people are homophobic, because they're backward, because they're savages, then we can displace or destroy their life world, right? Their cultural ways of being in the world, and replace it with a Western capitalist empty way of living because we have a few, gays who are willing to drop bombs.
Yep.
Right.
So, okay, so the sort of related, right? This past weekend in Boston, there was a protest against the Pride Parade because of its partnership with companies tied to Israel. Their slogan was "No cops, no corpse, no pride and genocide." So we're gonna play a little clip of this video.
Ooh, hold on. Can I start? Oh, I'm just going to start it over again.
Okay, hold on. Yeah.
Shut us down, and we didn't let them do that.
Yeah. So, and then, by the way, many of those folks protesting were queer folks. Many of them were protesting, and as we saw, brutalized by the police. And so I wondered, you spoke a bit to this, but maybe you can elaborate. What are the connections you see between Palestinian liberation and queer liberation?
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, immediately off the bat, I'm thinking of the anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism frameworks here. So thinking, as Palestinians are resisting the settler colonial state of Israel, and all of what that entails, and simultaneously thinking about how queer liberation movements resist Western notions of gender and sexuality that get imposed on its population that erase indigenous and or indigenous understandings of identity. So that's the first thing that popped out to me. So here's very much a connection again with these Palestinian liberation and queer liberation in the struggle against these dominant forms of oppression, these dominant systems of oppression, marginalization, these forms of violence, very much so. Um, I think both too, there's a resistance to um pinkwashing to many of the things that we saw before, like in essence is how to resist the manipulation of queer identities for the service of empire versus the and so that it can hide, the horrors that different empires are committing. I feel like both at their liberation roots are about kind of revealing that and not engaging in pinkwashing. And largely, too, I think there's ways that we can see this as solidarity. So I think back to Black civil rights organizations that look to Haiti, for instance, as inspiration for solidarity, and I think when we see these sorts of connections here in the US, and I was just in Greece, and there was so much that was spray painted on the walls that was anti Israel's occupation of Palestine. Again, I'm seeing or it harkens back to me, it harkens to this idea of global solidarity that can be there, that both queer liberation and Palestinian liberation can further that mission of global solidarity. And I think too, it could be about opposition to like police violence. Again, thinking about Stonewall, thinking about Israel and its training of U.S. police and its connection to Cop City, thinking about those factors, seeing again how all of these are interconnected and how queer people, especially queer people of color, especially Black queer people, are oftentimes the victims of physical, brutal force from police, sexual abuse from police, all those sorts of things. Happen in higher rates amongst in very high rates amongst queer Black folks. So I think again we can see resistance to that sort of police brutality in both movements as well.
Another connect that's excellent. And I think another connection I was thinking of is that the majority of Zionists in the United States are evangelical Christians. The majority of homophobes in the United States are evangelical Christians, right? Or at least the most vocal, right? The most organized, connected, and funded, right? Or have the ability to fund politicians are right-wing evangelicals. So that's like another connection, right, between these 2. Yeah.
So
yeah.
okay, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that made me think too of, and perhaps we're going into that, but it made me think of the right-wing evangelical groups that were going over to African countries to help construct laws that were basically these homophobic laws. The Kill the Gays bill that was very much influenced by right-wing white evangelical politicians or evangelical groups in the US. So another form of colonization you're seeing take place, another form of extracting these ideas and taking them, these homophobic, transphobic, and dangerous ideas, and trying to pass them off as inherent to the indigenous populations of a country when of course, yeah, we can have those issues, but also it's imposed oftentimes from wealthy and powerful outside forces, and here in this case, evangelicals.
Yeah, like Eric Berkeley, sorry, not Buckley. Evangelicals are something else.
Something.
So I'm gonna just like switch gears a little bit. So okay. And I'm not Afro-Latino, but I am technically an Afro-Latin American anthropologist, right? And one of the kind of like fundamental myths that I find myself having to deconstruct in classrooms is like, every time I get ready to teach, like, Afro-Latin American studies, I'm like, do I really have to have this conversation again? Like, Black people exist in Latin America, but apparently I do. But apparently I have to keep having that. And so I'm interested from you. So we haven't talked, I don't know, we didn't actually mention this, but you are Afro-Mexican to my knowledge?
Yes. Yeah.
Afro-Mexican. So I wanted to hear you maybe talk a little bit more about, one, your experience as what I would call an unambiguously Black Afro-Latino, because I think sometimes that creates different types of dynamics. But can you discuss some of the similarities and differences in researching Blackness, gender, and sexuality in Black studies, as opposed to like Latino studies or Afro-Latino studies, and how your work is received by those both in the sort of academic community, but then beyond, right? Because one of the things I was thinking about, I didn't want to necessarily ask a direct question about this, right? But what comes up a lot of times when I teach my Afro-Latin studies courses is the conversation about Latinx, right? And they're like, yeah. That obviously is used a lot in our intellectual academic circles, but for a lot of folks outside of the academy, that identification may or may not hold any kind of purchase. So I'm interested from you as an Afro-Latino who does work on, on queer communities and Black communities, do you see distinctions between how your work is received in Black studies as opposed to Latin American studies and by your communities outside of the academy?
Yeah, again, another great question. I do think that, there's a lot of connection here in terms of decolonial frameworks. For instance, I do think there's connections here about regarding resistance, and there's connection here regarding the diaspora. So I think, when you're thinking of Black studies, you are in many ways looking at the Black Caribbean, you are in many ways thinking of diasporic Black folks. And I think that's similar in Afro-Latino studies, I think, and in Latina studies as well. I also think, thinking about gender, thinking about sex, thinking about all these different oppressive systems become very important to both frameworks. So I think there's a lot of overlap, of course. I do think too, it's been unique, and I appreciated this question because, I grew up in a border town, El Paso, Texas, which has its own very unique history. My father was stationed in El Paso, so our Black population in El Paso was this unique population because it was Black folks who are part of the military, who have homes and stuff. compared to a lot of the population, looked very different, looked like much more middle class, I would argue. So that was a very unique experience. And my mother from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And so, you know, she's was immigrant to the US. And so very, very unique experience. I remember talking about being Afro-Latino, or back then they would call it Latinos, things like that. And having folks, because in El Paso, you know, it's 80% Mexican American slash Mexican nationals. And so folks immediately rejecting this idea that I could have any connection to Mexican identity or Latina identity at all. And so much ignorance around that. And I do think a lot has changed. I really, in the field of sociology, I was very much inspired by Eduardo Munilla Silva, who identifies as Afro-Latino himself, and wrote about the ways that Blacks and Latinos need to come together and work together in solidarity, and how lighter-skinned Latinos specifically need to understand that they are not white. You know, like some survey data suggests that, especially in Texas, that like a lot of Mexican folks do identify as white, and there's a whole complex history around that racialization. But it's understanding that in the U.S. and its political system and in different locations, you are not going to be seen as the dominant group, or there's going to be ways you're always made. That you're always vulnerable, whether it's your accent, whether it's, you know, there's always going to be some way, and that it's better to find solidarity and to work with Black folks. And so that was really important to me. Having folks write about their Afro-Blackness has been really important, and be critical of, you know, for a long time, Mexico didn't even include Black people in its data for the country. Yeah, and its census. And so there's movement to push that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so it took work on the ground of Afro-Latino folks who were embracing their Blackness, who understood its long history, who then actively pushed against this and got more recognition for Afro-Mexicans. So we're seeing that, and I think that's really important. I think in the case for a lot of Puerto Rican folks, I think too, when you're thinking of island folks who have been colonized by the U.S., and as they are migrating to the mainland, you're entering, especially in certain times, these political moments that I think sometimes might push folks to say, oh, if I want to escape particular judgments, if I don't want to associate with certain groups, I will say I am not that. I am not Black, or whatever that Blackness. And you do have that sometimes.
Anything but Black.
Black from pole to pole, but I'm not African. Absolutely not. Not me. I'm indigenous. I got
Absolutely.
What's the comedian face? I know Black.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's true also for, I know, for my students on campus, there's this weird tension sometimes between Africans from Africa and then Black Americans too. So you still see it. It's still a way of being like, no, this Blackness is not mine. I'm something different. So I think that a lot of that logic is still undergirded there. And so much of a need politically, again, to distance yourself from that Blackness, that is not great, right? Like, that's definitely not helpful. This makes me wonder, and I wonder if you two can speak to this too, but like, you know, I don't know if that means in essence that Black studies largely, but just by virtue of its field, is going to be a little more focused on Blackness in the US versus Afro-Latino studies, which is going to be perhaps much more concerned with Latin American countries. I don't know if that's a big distinguishing marker or not. I do think obviously culturally how that can play out as we're looking at different locations, even probably methodologically, as I think what I have tended to read when it comes to Afro-Latino studies has been very much ethnographic, and there's various sorts of methodologies that can be used in Black studies, for instance. So I sometimes think those are some of the strong distinctions. I don't know if you two would agree or complicate that.
Listen, so, you know, in my personal experience, I I find Latino studies,
Mhm.
Latino Latin American studies to be very white in the Americas, and
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I've not been able to find a home as a scholar of Afro Latin communities in Latin American
Mm.
studies. Like even
Mhm,
when you're
mhm.
looking for those things, right? I've always like Black studies has been the place where this is where you can do that work, not in
Right.
Latin studies whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it also is interesting because there's a growing field I think in Afro Latino studies generally, and I think it's a little bit problematic that the hegemony that Harvard has in terms of Afro Latin studies because there are different things there. But I definitely do feel like in Black studies, there's less of a question about what it is that I'm doing because Black people and our experiences as Black people are the center of that, whether that be Black folks in Venezuela and Mexico, in India, whether it's Dalits, whether it's Filipinos, whatever. For me, in terms of fields, I have found more my work is more legible, even as an Afro Latin Americanist, in Black studies, particularly, than it would be in Latinx studies, Latin American studies, whatever. Um, yeah, I don't know what
I
you
Yeah,
think that
fascinating.
depends. That depends if it's an African American,
That's true.
African diaspora, or Africana studies
That is
program,
true.
or Africology. No, taking the air quotes off. Africology. Like, do not come for me, please. Do not come for me, Afrocentrics. I got enough problems. But because I would say the ones that are most receptive are probably African diaspora,
Yeah.
because they tend to be codified as Black Atlantic, and Latin
Yeah.
America is part of the Atlantic
Yes,
world.
yes.
And Africana, if there is like a global focus. But African American studies probably not, because it's African American studies, and that tends to be also like ADOS. And I don't mean ADOS like the political, but like a particular type of African American. Sometimes it engages with like newer African American population, so first or second, third generation, but it tends to be like descendants of slavery and that sort of the social movements. And
but that's also a contradiction because we all descendants of slavery. It's
correct.
Slavery in the land.
But like U.S. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
I do. No,
and,
I know what
and,
you're saying.
And even in some, and so in some African American studies programs, they might have like a slavery course that covers like Brazil and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, there's not that many. If I'm thinking about my training and even just doing like research in terms of what constitutes these different departments and programs, there's not that many Afro Latin Americanists in terms of how they figure into like.
And I will say, because the Africana Studies program that I was in at first, I was in with Keto Swan, and Keto Swan does the Black Pacific. And so we both were people who did work on Black folks who were not US based Black folks, right? And who are not US based or continental African based, right? And so I found a home where I am now, the chair is Haitian. And so that, it creates a different kind of dynamic. So it definitely does matter, where you are.
So by way of, you kind of addressed the question about, I was going to talk about ask you a question about the Uganda like anti-LGBTQ law. You kind of spoke to it. So I actually want to we want to read this short piece by Barbara Smith called Why I Left the Mainstream Queer Rights Movement. And I just want to hear how this resonates with you, or what your thoughts are on it. It's a pretty short piece, so we'll just read through it. And the sort of, I don't know, the byline, the subtext is like, a Black feminist describes her disillusionment, saying many people are still marginalized, even in progressive circles. So it starts off, I have not been active in the organized LGBTQ movement for a long time. I enthusiastically participated in the first national march on Washington for lesbian and gay rights in 1979. About 10,000 of us were there. About 100,000 of us were there from around the country. A good turnout, but much smaller than subsequent marches, when being out in the crowd was less dangerous. At the second march in 1987, I was invited to be one of the 8 major speakers. It was exhilarating because a crowd of nearly 1 million people, it was exhilarating to speak before a crowd of nearly 1 million people.
At the same time, it was devastating to see the vast AIDS quilt on display in one place for the first time, symbolizing so much human loss. I felt ambivalent about the 1993 march. For me, it was overly focused on gays in the military and in presenting our community as an affluent consumer group to win favor from the corporate mainstream. This supposed affluence was not even real except for a privileged sector of largely white gay men. In 1999, the tight circle of organizers of the Millennium March in Washington reflected how narrow and hierarchical the movement had become.
A group of us established the multiracial ad hoc committee for an open process. Ted Beck, Mandy Carter, Chandra L. Ford, Kara Keeling, and I wrote an open letter to the march organized titled, "Will People of Color Pay the Price?" Our efforts at opening up the organizational process were not successful. I did not attend the 1999 march or any subsequent ones. For me, the Millennial March was the last straw.
I prefer to put my energy into multi-issue organizing. In the 1970s and 1980s, I co-founded the Combahee River Collective, a Black feminist group, and Kitchen Table, Women of Color Press, to give women of color, lesbians of color, and even gay men of color a voice. 3 decades later, despite some genuine efforts to increase diversity, especially in progressive movement circles, exclusivity and elitism still divide us. We've won rights and achieved recognition that would have been unimaginable 50 years ago, but many of us continue to be marginalized, both in the larger society and within the movement itself.
1 in 4 people in the LGBTQ community experienced food insecurity in 2017. 24% of lesbians and bisexual women earn less than the federal poverty line. LGBTQ youth have a 120% higher risk of experiencing homelessness than heterosexual cisgender youth. Black men who have sex with men have the highest rates of new HIV diagnoses. People who are transgender, particularly transgender women of color, experience appalling levels of violence, and this violence is exacerbated by poverty and racism.
These statistics show it is not possible to achieve justice in a vacuum. Marriage equality and celebrity culture will not solve it. Neither will political agendas focused on unquestioned assimilation. Gaining rights for some while ignoring the violation and suffering of others does not lead to justice. At best, it results in privilege. Unless we eradicate the systemic oppressions that undermine the lives of the majority of LGBTQ people, we will never achieve queer liberation.
So we just wanted to get what are your thoughts about that? Do you share those sentiments? Have you experienced this when organizing around queer issues? Does this come up in the writing that you do? And particularly, so something that we haven't mentioned is that you write about queer, or the experience of, I think, Black gay men on dating sites, right? Which I think this article speaks to some of that. So we just want to hear you sort of sound off on any of these.
And we know that dating sites are terrible for Black folks in general.
In general, right? Okay. No, I love this. I've read it and I definitely resonate with it in different ways. When I started my work, I was very much interested in, as a person who grew up was born in the late 80s and grew up in the early 90s when HIV and AIDS was the dominant discourse and a medical discourse. It was very much influential in how I came to understand queerness and sexuality and its relationship to Blackness. In particular, I was really interested in the roles that racism played in the increase of HIV/AIDS amongst Black queer folks and Black queer men in particular. So that is, how are we as Black queer people? How does racism construct our bodies as less valuable, less deserving, because we're not white, because we're not affluent, all these things that were brought up, and therefore deserving of HIV and AIDS, deserving of no resources, deserving of no protection, seen as, we have Black families that don't value education around these issues or protection around the issues. And so when I was doing my work, I was finding, oh, wait, it's not that Black people are having more condomless sex than white people. because white people are having just as much condomless sex, they're just not getting HIV at the same rate. So what's going on here? Other things seem to factor into this that are largely structural, right? Whether it be access to contraceptives, access to safe treatments, and knowledge around how to use contraceptives and things like that. It just wasn't the same, obviously, because these populations are not as valued oftentimes, or weren't put at the top of we weren't in the plays as the valuable white gay men were when it was looked at around HIV and AIDS. Same thing, and this I'm thinking of some of the works that have been done that he even pathologized Black queer folks as the cause of the spread of HIV and AIDS, which is absolutely not a true thing, but it's been constantly perpetuated. So then you have other folks who also played into this idea that queer Black folks are this harmful entity for our Black communities. And so yes, I was exploring that and engaging that and understanding that a lot of those factors as I was developing my own career, my own kind of direction with my work. And so hearing this and thinking about the way to organize, yes, it's very much been an impediment to the ways that we can organize, right? So I think the points that were brought up around housing is so incredibly important because so many Black folks can experience high levels of housing insecurity and rejection, who then have to turn to other means of survival, right? And it just puts their lives in a much more dangerous predicament. And so the fact that, again, that marriage equality for so long was kind of pushed, and that kind of homonormative assimilation was pushed, where instead of housing rights or ways to protect vulnerable Black populations, again speaks to that letter that you just read about queer liberation, that unless you're really seeing how all of this is interconnected, because lots of people across the board are experiencing homelessness, right? Lots of people across the board are experiencing different levels of poverty and are being exploited in different, hyper exploited in different ways. And so these things are real. So these kind of marches that are not paying attention to those other factors. And this goes back to, hey, Boston having the police be in the march, it all is interconnected. And so I do think that the article speaks to my own trajectory and speaks to a reality that I think is very true of why a lot of folks feel like they have to turn away from the mainstream white gay community. And it is very much, it's been widely documented how heteronormative and white the queer community is, how much it very much caters to elite white men, to this idea of white gay consumers who have no kids. A lot of that is not, we know, is so complicated for queer folks of color in the South, who do have families, who embrace their queerness after having children and leaving marriages or leaving different relationships. It's just not the same. And so the catering to that idea and that one form of sexual representation has been so detrimental. It also has forced a lot of Black queer folks in these very precarious sexual positions as well. So thinking about how Black sexuality ends up being consumed by the dominant, by whites, or especially on these dating apps as they fetishize certain Black folks, and what they're specifically looking at, how that places a lot of Black bodies in harm's way. A lot of times, especially if you don't have housing security and you need some help, and what you might have to do in these circumstances that white elite males can take advantage of to put Black young men and Black folks in general in very dangerous situations. So so yes, in that sense, what you're speaking about resonates tremendously with me and my work. It has definitely been something that I think is still true to this day, in terms of, and while we are seeing such progress too, like you mentioned, I have been so overjoyed. We've had protests here at Lawrence University. I've seen it in other universities as well that have been protesting the Israel, and I've seen tons of queer folks of color be out, and so that has been so warming and so important, because it does tell me that there's shifts that are happening. Again, the question is, are we returning to our radical roots, I think, and centering that radicalness as a way to save us and help expand our imaginations in the ways that we need to see survival, or to reach survival. But as long as we continue to grapple with or take incremental approaches to progress that the mainstream liberal kind of queer movement is aiming for, we will not be liberated.
Period. That is like a wonderful way to end. Thank you so much, Jesus, for being here. I feel like our audience learned a great deal. It was a wide-ranging conversation. We would love to have you back to talk more about your work. Do you want to shout out, what is your new book? Because you just, on your bio, just says, my new book with NYU. Does it have a title? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right now I'm finishing up. It's a book I'm titling Fat, Femme, and Fabulous. It's looking at how fatness and Blackness and fabulosity kind of work together to one, construct what is undesirable about Black bodies, but then also how Black bodies resist and how we embrace our Blackness and how we find pleasure in our Blackness. So keep a lookout on that. I'll have some things coming out for it, but hopefully that will be out in bookstores soon.
Wonderful.
We really appreciate you coming by. I think, like Sharice said, it was a really important and wide-ranging conversation. And I think there's definitely more for us to be in conversation about as we move forward.
Yes, we can't wait to read Fat, Femme, and Fabulous. We'll have you back. Thank you so much, Jesus.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. See you all.
All right. Hey, y'all. So that was awesome. Layla, there was a question I thought that maybe you could address about it was from Leah Boggs about here we go.
Okay. I don't know how to ask this question, but are there intra differences in how Afro-Latinx groups see and engage with each other? Not sure that makes sense.
Like, do you mean like Puerto Ricans?
Yeah.
Engage with Dominicans, engage with Mexicans, engage with Brazilian. Are Brazilians Latinx?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Listen, what's funny is that
Spanish. So.
No, because it's even this question about like Caribbean versus West Indian.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, part of the reason why West Indian is a term that primarily refers to Anglophone is because of the British West Indies. Like, people didn't call it the Portuguese West Indies or the Spanish West Indies.
Right.
But it's interesting because it's funny. I remember when I was in Venezuela, I had a friend who was Afro-Venezuelan, like grew up there, but he was from a part of the country that was closer on the coast to where Trinidad was. And like a lot of times people would be like, "Oh, are you actually like from here?" And he was like, "Yes, like I'm Venezuelan." Like, what the fuck? Because there is this like idea that Blackness is always from elsewhere. But then
you mean it was closer to Guyana?
No, I mean to Trinidad.
Venezuela.
Trinidad is off the coast of Venezuela.
Oh, okay. I'm African American. I don't know shit about geography. Okay.
Yeah, Trinidad's off the coast.
So that makes a lot of sense why Guyana and Trinidad have similar like Black in Afro and Indo-Guyanese and Trinidad. Anyway, okay.
Yeah. No, but also because I feel like in the US, right, we have this understanding of Latin America looking a particular way. But what I also realize is that like we think about Cuba as a white place because of all the white Miami Cubans, but the rest of Latin America knows that Cuba is a black ass fucking island. Black. And the reason why I say this is because like when I was in Mexico, people would often ask me if I was either
Dominican or Cuban.
No, not Dominican. Jamaican or Cuban. And that was because for them, like that was where Black folks came from, even though there are Afro-Mexicans, obviously. And not even just Afro-Mexicans in the way that Jesus is Afro-Mexican, as in like born in the US, but like there are large concentrations of Afro-Mexicans.
Veracruz.
Yes, in Veracruz, in Acapulco, on the Pacific coast, like other places. But that has been my experience, that people see Blackness in Latin America from elsewhere, even though literally 9% of enslaved Africans came to continental US.
Right.
Like 9%. Like it's so fucking crazy. But I think to answer Leah's question, I think it really depends on the types of experiences that those populations have had and where they've moved, right? I think for a lot of Afro-Latinos, like it is their experience coming to the US that creates a different relationship to their Blackness than what it is at home. And like one of the stories I always tell about this is like I remember when I studied abroad as an undergrad in the DR, I remember having this little girl named was Jeleni. Like I was on the border, like I was in Dajabon, which is a border town between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It's like a market town where they allow Haitians to come across the border every day to sell goods. And in this like family, they kept saying that the little girl looked like me. The little girl ain't look like nothing like me. It was just that we were the same complexion, and the rest of the family was lighter. And she was like, from the day that I got there, she was like kind of drawn to me, and I realized that she was drawn to me because of the way that I treated her and because of the way that her family treated her. But then when my father retold that story on his construction site, he worked with like some darker skinned Hondurans, Mexicans. One of his Honduran colleagues, like who was darker, like started crying, and he like realized that like that was the way that he had been treated in his own family, but he never, for whatever reason, had the language to articulate what that experience was. And so like I don't know. I don't want to say that people, I definitely don't want to say that people only come to have an experience with their Blackness as a result of being in the US, because I think that's also problematic. Mm-hmm. But there is something about the experience in the US that I do think collapses Blackness in a particular kind of way, where people like your ethnic Blackness is less important than you know your Blackness per se, as opposed to like what their experiences are in their home countries. But you know, I have not paid enough attention to the way Afro-Latinos in the US from different places interact with each other as Afro-Latinos, right? Because there's a difference, I think, between interacting as Black folks generally versus as Afro-Latinos. So I can't answer that question as directly as I think will be helpful to you, Leah, but I think it's interesting to think about.
I don't have the expertise that Leila has. The one place I did see it when I was in Cali, there was the way that Colombians talked about Venezuelans. They all were Afro because they were cleaning the hotel, right? They all were darker skin, like, so my complexion are darker, but don't start. but there was a way that the Afro-Venezuelans, there wasn't solidarity around being Afro, right? There was a sort of nationalistic way that the Afro-Venezuelans, and that has to do with immigration status, right? Yeah. And so
there's weird relationships between Colombia and Venezuela in that regard, anyway, especially pre-Petro, this particular.
Right. So ideological, right? And so for whatever that's worth.
Should not give Linda no start. You know, we're not gonna have color wars on here.
We're not having the color wars.
Also, because today I'm looking very light skinned.
Okay, y'all.
Most of the Afro-Latinos I know don't. No, it's true, and that's the point that I was making about the fact that there is a very distinct experience that Afro-Latinos have, I think, in their home countries. But it's so crazy because what ends up happening is like, because of the way race is talked about and or not talked about in the home countries, particularly the Dominican Republic is a special place. Like I think this is true all over Latin America, but the DR is a special place for this because so much of the way Blackness is understood and defined is in relationship to Haitians, right? And so like for a lot of folks in the DR, there is no distinction between Africa and Haiti. Like Africa is Haiti West, right? I mean, sorry, Haiti is Africa West in a particular kind of way. But then when they come to the US and they have these experiences where they are treated as Black people, then they can remember a series of experiences that they've had at home in the DR that then say, oh, this actually has been present this whole time. But again, like I said about the Honduran guy, I didn't necessarily have the language to articulate what was happening to me because it's not talked about in that particular kind of way.
And let me just tell you something. Until maybe undergrad, I did not understand what an Afro-Latino was. I thought Joel Santana was Black.
Well, he is Black.
So Joel's fabulous when they're like, I'm whatever the fuck, I'm like, You're not African American. It's not even African American, but it's like, but you're black though. Irrespective of all that other shit, like for y'all to disidentify in a particular way, like that was wild to me. But you know, it's very interesting. In New York, it seems like to be a particular crucible for like all of the different ways that non-African American blackness, and also even in Boston with the Cape Verdean population.
Listen, Cape Verdeans are the Dominicans of Africa,
right?
And it's just.
They're like, we are not African.
Yes.
Cape Verde is in
I know black.
I know black.
That is terrible. Don't listen. No, but I will. I think was it Leah? I did not listen. I studied abroad in the Dominican Republic in 2006. I am from North Carolina. I grew up in the U.S. South. The worst experiences I have ever had with anti-Black racism were in the Dominican Republic, and I will never return. I will not go back to DR. Definitely not on no tourist dollar shit. Like maybe for an academic conference about Blackness, sure. But to vacation in the DR, I will never. On top of the expelling of Haitians, expelling of Black Dominicans, like all of those things. But I never experienced anti-Black racism the way in the South, the way that I did in Venezuela. I mean, sorry, not in Venezuela, in the Dominican Republic. And I just. That was in 2006. I have not recovered from that experience. I almost dropped out of school because like I had such a terrible experience that I went home over spring break, and my dad was like, "Well, you know, if you don't go back, then you like forfeit the semester." I was like, well, "I don't care." He's like, "No, you're going back."
Yes, Leah Fabulous is Afro. I think he's Panamanian or something.
Oh, I think maybe he's Panamanian.
It's something like this. So it's like Los, right? Like maybe Carlos. Although I know a lot of Black Carloses. Maybe they're Afro-Latino too. I don't know. I'm not sure, but yeah.
But actually, a lot of folks are Afro-Latino that we don't recognize or know. And that's what I said. That's what I was saying to Jesus. Those who are unambiguously Black, like the ones who we don't question their Blackness, then we get uptight when they claim Puerto Rican or Panamanian or whatever else. But that is their ethnic identity. And for a lot of them, because language, like if they actually are Spanish speaking, there are other things that they're resonating with. But yeah, it's a lot of Afro-Latinos that we don't actually know. And then, then there's people like Giancarlo Esposito, who's Afro-Italian. Black Italian, but he has his whole life and career in Black movies in the U.S. because of Spike Lee, right? So there's a lot of folks.
Entre dicho hecho hay un gran trecho.
I can't.
Anywho, all right, y'all. So for our study section, we actually wanted to read this piece. We're already at 1 hour, 40 minutes. These are just get you strap in, strap in, y'all. I said strap in. Grab your popcorn. Grab your popcorn.
Okay.
Grab your red vines. Okay. I put red vines on wax. Let me tell you something. Actually, you know what? I'm not even gonna do it.
No,
I'm not even gonna do it.
I'm
not gonna do it.
I don't care. I didn't know what red vines are.
No. So okay, but I do want to take a poll. Are you a Twizzlers? Or are you a Red Vines? Are you a Twizzlers or are you a Red Vines? Like what? Put in the chat, Twizzlers or Red Vines or nothing because the red dye is actually poison. None of us should be eating it.
Listen, when she gave it to me today, I was like, I don't particularly like this. I like the taste of Twizzlers, but that's also because we live in the U.S. and I like toxic taste.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I'm sure the red vines are better than Twizzlers.
Poison is meant to taste good. So, okay. So does anybody have, so I want to so what do y'all, I want y'all to drop in the chat.
Oh, Elon is Cape Verdean?
Oh.
Well, then
are you Black Elon? Do you identify as African Elon?
Listen, the person I'm dating is Cape Verdean, and he's unambiguously Black. So there's no, he's very dark skinned, but he has all kinds of shit having grown up in the Cape Verdean community here because of his dark skinnedness. So
right.
Shout out to North. Cool, Ocelot. Are you from North Carolina? Let's see where they're from. The Colombians that claim African, more Southern Blacks that I've met, and if you listen to the music, yeah. Well, Colombia is interesting because I feel like they're because of in most Latin. I'll say this: in most Latin American countries, there are race is also regional. And when I say that, I mean like there are parts of the country that are understood to be Black places.
Like Cali and Buenaventura
in Colombia. So like in Nicaragua and Honduras, like the Caribbean coast, the blue fields, the Caribbean coast, where the Garifuna, like that. Even in Venezuela, like the Caribbean coast is where, like Barlovento is where the Afro descendants are, and that. But again, all of that is a history of slavery, also because that is where there were cacao plantations. That's where the Afro descendant populations were concentrated because they were working as enslaved people, right? And so, the Blackness is really interesting in the Latin American context because it has these kind of regional, territorial definite, like there are all these other things, right? And then like in Colombia, they actually speak palenquero, right? Like the palenque. So like there is actually, because a lot of times, like in the US, the problem with Blackness is that we are often not considered ethnically distinct. But in the Latin American context, like particularly in Colombia, because of the palenques, because they speak palenquero, there is an ethnic distinction because they speak a different language, whatever, right? So it's interesting dynamics in the Latin American context.
Kids will just sneeze and fart on you and they don't care. I guess she's 6 months old, but she just sneezed on me and went about her business.
Oh God.
That's crazy. It's a panty outside. You just sneezing on people?
What did it say? Two of my siblings tried to marry anti-Black Dominicans. They said we were better than blood because we light skinned. Yeah, but that mejorar la raza or to advance the race, that's
Emblacamiento, jibarismo, all that shit is like crazy. That's why there's so many Japanese in is it Argentina?
Oh, Brazil has the largest Japanese population outside of Japan.
But yes, because even in Portugal, let me talk about Obrigado, because that was their project of emblacamiento. They couldn't get enough whites, so they started bringing in Japanese.
And that's what they did.
Fascists, Japanese fascists after World War II. Literally, it's like the equivalent to bringing in all them German Nazis.
Yeah, so it sounds like y'all wanted to do an Afro-Latino show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to get a co-host because I don't know nothing about this.
Ralph Pasta said Twizzlers. Sister Sheena said Twizzlers. Neither chocolate.
Red
Twizzlers.
Vines.
Look, everybody wants the toxic Twizzlers.
The TTs. Twix better than Twizzlers, sure. But that's not the question,
I've
bruh.
never eaten either. I'm a food snob trying to avoid the white man's poison as possible. Good for you.
Good for you. If you say raisins is the nature's candy, I'm blocking you.
My daddy loves raisins.
He is the only. I can't accommodate any other raisin lovers other than W.E.B. De Brown. I'm not doing it.
Oh my God. Cool. I select those. What a bad choice. Oh, Loisa, Puerto Rico. Yeah. I had a student who was from Loisa. Let's see, what have we missed? I appreciate the knowledge.
What you sneezed on you? She was. Cool. Also, she's smiling so big at the sneeze on you. Absolutely. It is so rude. Jeez.
Listen, first of all, I don't know why Sharice always be acting like this child be doing listen, we just have bodily functions. And she was like, I can't do anything. I can't do anything else.
She's turning her head right now.
She did it
could have been like, that's what I'm saying.
It's okay, boo.
She's shameless.
It's okay, boo.
Yeah.
It's okay, my love. I know.
All I'm saying is have a little courtesy. I shat you out of my womb.
Please don't
sneeze in my mouth. Anyway, y'all, we are completely off topic. Okay, so we're doing this June Jordan piece.
Yes, we're gonna read this June Jordan piece.
All right, so again, in the interest of, since this is our sort of pride episode, just because sexuality is something that's often not as marginalized in our talks about Pan-Africanism, about Black internationalism, about Black radical
and because
politics.
People often think that Sharice and I are couples. They think I'm the baby daddy.
Yeah, or that we're a throuple. Yeah.
No, I don't think throuple because we're not really out with
together.
Tongo. Yeah,
but they're like, yeah, you got this man and then you got this girl. That's technically a throuple or poly or whatever the fuck. I don't know any of the new terminology.
Yeah.
But
see, we kept it together while Jesus was on, but now we're just cutting up.
Yeah, it's a mess.
The more reaction you give, baby, the funnier it is to play in your face. Listen, I love it. I was on a train and couldn't respond. Well, I'm unambiguous, but I identify as African. My family is from Providence. Oh, see, because you up here. Okay. But I was born in Harlem. And also, I think that also makes a difference too. When you grow up in an area where there are other Black folks of non-US Black folks, then I think that creates other avenues for people to identify different ways. But Boston is New England is an interesting place for Blackness. I just say that.
So the piece that we want to read, y'all, is by June Jordan, and it's called A New Politics of Sexuality, and it is from July 1991. We're going to read it from this book, Life as Activism, June Jordan's writings from the Progressive. But we also have it pulled up here so you all can follow along. We the new Reading Rainbow. Shout out to LeVar Burton. If they bring Reading Rainbow back, we can host. Butterfly in the sky.
But actually, LeVar Burton is hilarious.
He is so funny. I'm funny too, though. So we could fight we can battle for the position.
Go ahead.
Okay. So to start off, as a young worried mother, I remember turning to Dr. Benjamin Spock's Common Sense book of baby and child care just about as often as I pick up the telephone. He was God. I was ignorant, but striving to be good, a good mother. And so it was there in that bestseller pocketbook of do's and don'ts that I came upon this doozy of a guideline. Do not wear miniskirts or other provocative clothing because that will upset your child, especially if your child happens to be a boy. If you give your offspring cause to think you are a sexual being, he will, at the least, become disturbed. You will derail the equilibrium of his notions about your possible identity and meaning in the world.
That's so crazy. It had never occurred to me that anyone, especially my son, might look upon me as an asexual being. I had never supposed that asexual was some kind of positive designation I should, so to speak, lust after. I was pretty surprised by Dr. Spock. However, I was also by habit a creature of obedience. For a couple of weeks, I actually experimented with lusterless colors, and dowdy tops and bottoms. Dowdy tops and bottoms? Okay. Subconsciously hoping thereby to prove myself as a lusterless and dowdy and therefore excellent female parent. That's wild.
Years would have to pass before I could recognize the familiar by then absurdity of a man setting himself up as the expert on a subject that presupposed women as the primary objects for his patriarchal discourse, on motherhood no less. Years passed before I came to perceive the perversity of dominant power assumed by men and the perversity of self-determining power ceded to men by women.
A lot of years went by before I understood the dynamics of what anyone could summarize as the politics of sexuality. I believe the politics of sexuality is the most ancient and probably the most profound arena for human conflict. Increasingly, it seems clear to me that deeper and more pervasive than any other oppression, than any other bitterly contested human domain, is the oppression of sexuality, the exploitation of the human domain of sexuality for power.
When I say sexuality, I mean gender. I mean male subjugation of human beings because they are female. When I say sexuality, I mean heterosexual institutionalization of rights and privilege denied to homosexual men and women. When I say sexuality, I mean gay or lesbian contempt for bisexual modes of human relationships.
The politics of sexuality therefore subsumes all of the different ways in which some of us seek to dictate to others of us what we should do, what we should desire, what we should dream about, and how we should behave ourselves generally, from China to Iran, from Nigeria to Czechoslovakia, from Chile to California. The politics of sexuality, enforced by traditions of state-sanctioned violence, plus religion and the law, reduces to male domination of women, heterosexist tyranny, and among those of us who are in any case deemed despicable or deviant by the powerful, we find intolerant for those who choose a different and more complicated, for example, an interracial or bisexual mode of rebellion and freedom. Okay, we must move out from the shadows of our collective subjugation as people of color, as women, as gay, as lesbian, as bisexual human beings.
I can voice my ideas without hesitation or fear because I am speaking finally about myself. I am black and I am female and I am a mother and I am bisexual and I am a nationalist and I am an anti-nationalist. And I mean to be fully and freely all that I am. Conversely, I do not accept that any white or black or Chinese man, I do not accept that, for instance, Dr. Spock should presume to tell me or any other woman how to mother a child. He has no right. He is not a mother. My child is not his child. And likewise, I do not accept that anyone, any woman, or any man who is not inextricably part of the subject he or she dares to address should attempt to tell any of us, the objects of her or his presumptuous discourse, what we should do or what we should not do.
Recently, I have come upon gratuitous and appalling pseudo-liberal pronouncements on sexuality. Too often, these utterances fall out of the mouths of men and women who first disclaim any sentiment remotely related to homophobia, but who then proceed to issue outrageous opinions like the following: that it is blasphemous to compare the oppression of gay, lesbian, or bisexual people to the oppression, say, of Black people or of Palestinians. That the bottom line about gay or lesbian or bisexual identity is that you can conceal it whenever necessary. And so therefore, why don't you do just that? Why don't you keep your deviant sexuality in the closet and let the rest of us who suffer oppression for reasons of our ineradicable and always visible components of our personhood, such as race or gender, get on with our more necessary or more beleaguered struggle to survive?
Well, number one, I believe I have worked as hard as I could, and then harder than that, on behalf of equality and justice for African Americans, for the Palestinian people, and for people of color everywhere. And no, I do not believe it's blasphemous to compare oppression of sexuality to oppressions of race and ethnicity. Freedom is indivisible, or it is nothing at all besides sloganeering and temporary, short-sighted and short-lived advancement for a few. Freedom is indivisible, and either we are working for freedom or you are working for the sake of your self-interest, and I am working for mine.
Go ahead.
Okay, if you can finally go to the bathroom, wherever you find one, if you can finally order a cup of coffee and drink it wherever coffee is available, but you cannot follow your heart, you cannot respect the response of your own honest body in the world, then how much of what kind of freedom does any one of us possess?
Or conversely, if your heart and your honest body can be controlled by the state or controlled by community taboo, are you not then, and in that case, no more a slave ruled by outside force? What tyranny could exceed a tyranny that dictates to the human heart and that attempts to dictate the public career of an honest human body? Freedom is indivisible. The politics of sexuality is not some optional special interest concern for serious progressive folks. And on another level, let me assure you, if every single gay or lesbian or bisexual man or woman active on the left of American politics decides to stay home, there would be no left.
Oh, y'all gay. One of the things I want to propose is that we act on that reality, that we insistently demand reciprocal respect and concern from those who cheerfully depend upon our brain and our energies for their and our effective impact on the political landscape. Last spring at Berkeley, some students asked me to speak at a rally against racism, and I did. There were 400 to 500 people massed on Sproul Plaza, standing together against that evil. And on the next day, on that same plaza, there was a rally for bisexual and gay and lesbian rights, and students asked me to speak at that rally, and I did. There were fewer than 75 people stranded, pitiful, on that public space. And I said then what I say today, that was disgraceful. That should have been just one rally. Freedom is indivisible.
As for the second nefarious pronouncement on sexuality that now enjoys mass media currency, the idiot notion of keeping yourself in the closet. That is very much the same thing as the suggestion that Black folks and Asian Americans and Mexican Americans should assimilate and become as white as possible in our walk, talk, music, food, values, or else we should deservedly perish. Sure enough, we have plenty of exposure to white everything. So why would we opt to remain our African Asian Mexican selves? The answer is that suicide is absolute. And if you think you will survive by hiding who you really are, you are sadly misled. There is no such thing as partial or intermittent suicide. You can only survive if you, who you really are, do survive.
Likewise, we who are not men and we who are not heterosexist, we sure enough have plenty of exposure to male-dominated heterosexist this or that. But a struggle to survive cannot lead to suicide. Suicide is the opposite of survival. And so we must not conceal, assimilate, integrate into the would-be dominant culture and political system that despises us. Our survival requires that we alter our environment so that we can live and so that we can hold each other's hands and so that we can kiss each other on the streets and in the daylight of our existence without terror and without violent and sometimes fatal reactions from the busybodies of America.
Finally, I need to speak on bisexuality. I do believe that the analogy is interracial or multiracial identity. I do believe that the analogy for bisexuality is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial worldview. Bisexuality follows from such a perspective and leads to it as well. Just as there are many men and women in the United States whose parents have given them more than one racial, more than one ethnic identity and cultural heritage to honor, and just as these men and women must deny no given part of themselves except at the risk of self-deception and the insanities that must ensue from that, and just as these men and women embody the principle of equality among races and ethnic communities, and just as these men and women falter and anguish and choose and then falter again and then anguish and then choose yet again, how they will honor the irreducible complexity of their God-given human being, even so, there are many men and women, especially young men and women, who seek to embrace the complexity of their total, always changing social and political circumstance.
They seek to embrace our increasing global complexity on the basis of the heart and on the basis of an honest human body, not according to ideology, not according to group pressure, not according to anybody's concept of correct. This is a new politics of sexuality, and even as I despair of identity politics, because identity is given in principles of justice, equality, freedom, cut across given gender and given racial definitions of being, and because I will call you my brother, I will call you my sister on the basis of what you do for justice, what you do for equality, what you do for freedom, and not on the basis of who you are. Even so, I looked with admiration and respect upon the new bisexual politics of sexuality.
This emerging movement politicizes the so-called middle ground. Bisexuality invalidates either or formulation, either or analysis. Bisexuality means I am free and I am as likely to want to love a man as I am as likely to want and to love a woman as I am to want and to love a man. And what about that? Isn't that what freedom implies? If you are free, you are not predictable and you are not controllable. To my mind, this is the keenly positive politicizing significance of bisexual affirmation.
To insist upon complexity, to insist upon the validity of all the components of social sexual complexity, to insist upon the equal validity of all the components of social sexual complexity. This seems to me a unifying 1990s mandate for revolutionary Americans planning to make it into the 21st century on the basis of the heart, on the basis of an honest human body, consecrated to every struggle for justice, every struggle for equality, every struggle for freedom. Bow, bow, bow.
No, bow, bow, bow.
Bow. Bang, bang. And it's interesting. I feel like in a particular way, the sort of struggle of that June Jordan marks out for bisexuals reminds me of the struggle for trans folks, right? Because part of what she's saying is that bisexual folks are marginalized in the overall queer struggle, just as I think trans folks can be marginalized in the overall, like LGB, even B, right? With the B's got assimilated, I guess, into the LGBT, right? And so it's interesting how there's new, like, you know, or different groups that even within the sort of broader marginalized like sexualities, there's groups that are on the margins of those margins, right? Yeah.
No, I mean, I know we're already at 2 hours, so we're going to go through. What is this Grand Zaddy LeVar? Oh, when we were talking about LeVar
Burton.
Grand Zaddy.
Butterfly in the sky.
Occupy type is high. Okay, yeah, we're in a whole other place right now. No, but I do think that somebody said something about sexuality that I wanted to push up. Who said?
No, it was down there. I think we're so oppressed. Yeah.
I think I think most people are so oppressed we don't realize we are oppressed in our sexuality. And I think that's true even of heterosexual sexuality. Like the conversations that we allow ourselves to have or not have about sexuality. I think in the same way that we were talking about with Jesus, this idea that people can be outed because of particular kink or interest or whatever, whether that be homosexuality, bisexuality, or something else beyond that. I think that we do ourselves a disjustice by allowing those types of things to be things that allow us to see one another as not human, and that we create some of the terms of our own immiseration when we do not allow people to be themselves in those kinds of ways, and then it compromises other more meaningful ways of us allowing to be able to exist in the world. When I say that, I don't mean like our sexuality is not meaningful. What I mean is that when we use that as a way of discriminating against or ostracizing folks, then we don't allow ourselves to, then we create conditions that allow other things that matter, like our freedom, our liberation, to be jeopardized because we're trying to hide those types of things about ourselves.
You know, and I think that because I'm a communist, I feel like when we're homophobic and transphobic, and also I hate those terms. I think that the phobic thing is dumb as like I just don't like but when people hate and want to kill and want to ostracize and exile people because of their sexuality, I feel similar to how I feel about when they do that shit to communist people. It's like you're lopping off some of the most effective, some of the most consistent, some of the most principled, and some of the most dedicated organizers. And so I'm thinking now about Onye Sonwu's piece, right? And how they actually had to struggle to win people over to the understanding of of LGBT or queer liberation, right? For a shorthand, because it's like you don't have to agree or what with people's quote unquote lifestyle or whatever, but you do have to agree that if you say you care about Black people, if you say you care about a particular gender, if you say you care about human rights, then you cannot care about those things wholeheartedly and think that a subset of that population should be oppressed, marginalized, cast out, or these things somehow don't apply to them. Because when you start, making exceptions for particular groups, and then those who are quote unquote deserving of liberation become smaller and smaller and smaller. At the same time, I do not like the identitarian turn. I do not like the liberal turn of some of these politics where it's about sort of an individualist understanding of how you can be in the world. And it doesn't engage what we were talking about earlier. It doesn't engage issues of impoverishment, right? Issues of structural violence, issues of, broader sort of material struggles. And it's only about a sort of individual. It reproduces a liberal or even a bourgeois logic because it's about like an individual's right to be in the world or something like that, right? Which is different than like a human right and a sort of politics of a broader liberation.
Well, we could talk about this more and more, but I feel like maybe we should start to wrap up.
You must gotta pee.
Why?
I feel like we get in our bag and you just that's great. Until next time. You gotta pee?
I'm gonna leave. No, I don't. I actually don't. You're the one who usually is like, I want to be mindful of time, and I'm just trying to do that.
But we've already broken the cherry. What is it? We broke the cherry of going over 2 hours. So here we are.
Broken the seal.
Broken the
That's
seal.
what you're talking about.
The cherry. Whatever. Same shit. We talk about sexuality shit. Y'all know what I mean. We've already gone over 2 hours, but so just like, what are some of I just want to see. Let's see. Somebody said Chairman Sankara. Yes, Chairman Sankara. She's the boss of everybody.
Chairperson.
All right. Well,
we don't know how she identifies.
Chair sneeze in my mouth, Sankara.
That is true.
So,
because she burped in mine earlier.
So all these.
Wow.
Right. Listen, there was also an interlude of wildness before this. So, all those lawmakers concentrating on sex so much come across as extremely sexually repressed, and they just want to pass it along. Listen, half them motherfuckers is at glory holes in a bathroom in DC. It is literally. I think it was Boehner. There's a whole bunch of these Republican people that it's like, bro, and it's like, why do you like? I don't understand that logic. Is it just an assertion of power? But it's like, don't you want to rep for your people, or you want to keep it grimy?
They don't though,
and hidden.
I think there is something like tantalizing for them about being something else. It's like they're always otherwise very boring, and so their sexuality is like probably the only thing interesting about them.
But anyway, y'all. So hopefully we did justice to this topic in terms of like just thinking about sexuality as part of a broader African liberation struggle from many different aspects. Hopefully you all enjoyed the interview with Jesus Gregorio Smith. Look out for his book. Read that June Jordan piece. And also this book, Life is Activism, June Jordan's writings from The Progressive, is awesome. It's a collection of
the lights, like really. Dang, you can't see it at all.
Yeah, it's black and white. So I just read the title. That's the title of the book. What does it say? Dr. CBS will put Dr. Lay Brown onto TVP. Yes.
What is TVP?
Oh my gosh. Okay, y'all. So speaking of download, I'm sorry, I got excited.
Wait, what is TVP?
So TVP is Team Banky Pound. Like, okay, y'all know I love prison YouTube.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh,
Banky Pound
okay.
is a particular prison YouTuber who I watch very faithfully. So TVP is like his thing. He'll be like, shout out everybody on Team Banky Pound. I appreciate the love. Bum, bum, bum. I appreciate the support. Yes, I've seen every video, y'all. So subscribe to Banky Pound and tell him I sent you. But not Zay, I guess, follows me on Instagram and saw that I'm subscribed to Banky.
But why did that make me think about B2K bump bump bump?
Maybe that's where he got it.
Baby, turn around and let me see that sexy body go bump bump bump.
No Diddy. Y'all, we got to get out of here.
We do because but our last thing is our book updates.
Yes, I forgot about that. Okay.
So this is what we decided. We keep changing what we're reading in the midst of the week. So we're not going to announce what we're going to read next week, but we will continue to check in about what we read. So I read The Struggle Continues, which is a little tiny little pamphlet. But what I think is actually really interesting about this pamphlet is that, so it starts with what I mean by positive action. And when Nkrumah talks about positive action, this is earlier on, this is before Ghana's independence. And then the rest of the pieces in the pamphlet are post-exile, right? So post his overthrow. And what I think is really interesting is that when he talks about positive action in the beginning, like pre-presidency, he's very staunchly like a proponent of nonviolent civil disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
But you see like very clearly, and also like because most of these the little pamphlet, so it's a collection of pamphlets. So most of the pamphlets were actually direct.
Yes. Everything.
Damn, cool. I select. Yes.
Like if it's like 50 pages or above, it counts.
This is 81 pages. Thank you. What is it? 83 pages. Thank you. Anyway, but what is really interesting about it is that so most of these pamphlets are directed towards the Ghanaian people, and so he's making these arguments about what they need to do to combat like foreign capital, the different people who are in power at the time. But what becomes very clear is that his position as principally nonviolent is like obsolete. Like he's no longer in support of that shit, and it is in response to what is happening in the country. And so I think it's interesting to be able to see things like this that were transpiring in real time be put together in the collection to see the development of people's thought, not just like in terms of ideology or theory, but also in terms of real like material responses to what's happening. Because like in the beginning, the stuff you see in the first half of the pamphlet, like there's a lot of hope about a socialist Ghana, nationalizing resources. And then when you see that there are all these other folks who are coming in and taking advantage of what the cacao, what do you call it? Not cacao. What is it?
Cocoa.
Shea butter. The shea butter stuff. Yeah, well, all that
Shea
stuff.
butter.
When they start using it, not for the purposes of the people, then then Nkrumah's positions on these things change. And I think that is a really interesting thing to kind of see transpire over time. So I would definitely recommend This Struggle Continues pamphlet.
Sorry. Yes, Fleece is doing interviews, and Banky Pound has a whole
Lord, this your
Banky has a lot of response videos to the Fleece interviews. Fleece creeps me out, I'm not gonna lie, but I do like Banky. Banky thinks he is hilarious. Banky does a lot of response videos to Fleece Johnson. Okay, but y'all focus. Okay, so I've been doing a thing where I'm like finishing a book on Audible, and then also because I've been like getting back in the gym. Y'all,
she has been.
I've been getting back in the gym.
I get my little alerts.
Yes,
just finished the workout.
Yeah, so that's when I listen to audiobooks. And so I listen to If They Come in the Morning, edited by Angela Davis, which is amazing. I highly recommend. Highly recommend. I especially love the section on Ruchell McGee. I didn't realize that Ruchell McGee, they had deemed him like a like low IQ, so like a 75 IQ. And so I didn't realize that as part of his story. And so it was remarkable that he like was defending himself in court. And he also pushed back against that. He said that basically the IQ test was like a tool of the prosecutors to try to make it so he couldn't defend himself in court. There's a lot of amazing, just amazing content in that book, If They Come in the Morning. So I listened to that on Audible, but then I also read Hubert Harrison, The Negro and the Nation, which is another actually really interesting book. It's really around the period of like shortly after World War I, and he's talking a lot about Black people and socialism. It's also a little short book, but it's very, very good. And so, yes, so I also am probably going to change horses mid-race, as they say, but I am thinking about reading this
I
new
just
book.
said we weren't doing that, and you do.
But I want to lift up my girl Kelly book,
Okay, fine.
We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance. So this just dropped. I don't know how it is because I haven't read it, but shout out to Kelly, who is actually just a lovely human being. This is an awesome cover. And I probably, and this is almost 300 pages. It's like 250, not including notes, but the writing is huge. So I probably can get through this in a week. And it's already Wednesday. Is it Wednesday?
It
Thursday?
is Wednesday.
I'm reading a few other books, so I'll let you know what I actually ended up finishing this week. But that is my reading.
They want an audible version of Black Scare, Red Scare with you.
Oh
Look,
God,
y'all.
I cannot read.
So speaking of, because didn't we talk about Kendi earlier?
Yes. You listen to How to Be Anti-Racist?
Yeah. This is during the pandemic. I listened to How to Be Anti-Racist during the pandemic.
I feel like
First of all, it's a terrible book, but the narration is even worse than the book.
He has a surprisingly deep voice.
But what is wild to me is that it's your own reading. It's your own book. Why are you reading it so terribly? But anyway. Yeah,
but also like, so I don't think if there was a audiobook, I would not read it because I hate my voice and the fact, and I don't need to listen back to anything. Like I can't stand it. And
but
y'all see, I be
listen to it. You just gotta read
but
it.
you see, I be stuttering over words and shit. Like it just would probably take 100 takes for me to read the words. I also don't know if the Black Scare, Red Scare, I don't know how books that have a lot of quotations are good on Audible because I don't know how they actually like square that circle. But we'll see.
I get distracted. Honestly, like for me on Audible, academic books on Audible are not the best bet for me because I like to take notes. Because somebody said, who was it? Tay said that it was taking a while to read because I like to take notes. And so listening, if I don't have something to write with, then it I don't know. I get anxious about it. So I don't tend to listen to academic books. I tend to read those.
So there's a way you can bookmark the section that you're at if you go through. Yeah. I think okay.
After a few minutes.
Yeah. Cat Terrell, we'll see. Okay. I'm gonna look into it. We don't have anything in the works yet, but I want Regina King to read my book. She got all the voices. Riley's voice. I would love my book to be read in Riley's voice.
You getting mad?
Okay, Naze. All right, y'all. We need to go for real. It's 2 hours 15. My baby's crying. She's over it. She's tired of my voice. So
I think she's just mad because she wants our love.
She is.
And this is the reason why I can't hold Sankara during the show is because I would just be talking to Sankara. I wouldn't be talking to the camera.
Yeah, I could just hold her and ignore her. I'm just playing. I'm a good mom, you guys.
Yes.
I say bye.
Say bye. Say bye.
Say
no. Say what's the little girl? Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. I'm trying to think about what Banky says. Naze, what does Banky say for when he's leaving? I can't remember. He says, I can't remember. I just remember his intro.
Yeah, see, I'm not really into prison YouTube like that, but I know you were.
It's so good.
And you're not the only person. Like I have a lot of friends who are into prison YouTube.
By the way, Kenyatta, we saw your email. So yeah. Duck them hooks. That's what he says. And duck them hooks. Bom, bom, bom. They everywhere. So duck them hooks, y'all.
Peace. See y'all next time. Bye.